Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on Autodesk Inventor model states. This is a great new feature from Autodesk for the 2022 version of the software. My name is Tim Shaul, Solutions Engineer with M2 Technologies, and I will be reviewing this new functionality with you. So we're going to cover several main areas today. A quick overview, then we're going to review part, assembly, and simplification model states, and also the instance properties that you can use for managing the bill of materials and the parts list. So first, just a little information about M2 Technologies. We are an Autodesk partner that focuses just on manufacturing. We've been in business for over 20 years and have helped thousands of customers with their software and consulting needs around Autodesk products. We have 7 locations in the United States, and we are also a partner with Microdesk. So Microdesk, generally we work with them on the architectural side. We provide a number of different services around this Autodesk platform and some third-party applications. We can help you with your CAD management needs, your software needs, and other areas, even getting into some consulting work around generative design and visualization. So let's go ahead and take a look at these model states. Now, model states are new for the 2022 version, and these enable you to create multiple representations of parts, assemblies within a single document. So if you're familiar with iParts, it's basically the same type of concept, but there's no longer a need to have an external file, a factory, a child, and managing all those files and relationships. Okay, so everything is now stored just in the single file. So if that's a part file or an assembly file. So why would you want to use model states? So basically, model states empower you to create more flexible designs. You can create a part that has maybe different representations. These can be maybe, say, a cast part that is then machined and maybe finished off before you take that part and put it into an assembly. So it might have multiple different processes that you have to support to actually fabricate or make that part. So it's basically a way to make more flexible parts, simplified versions, or more detailed versions to support the whole process without the need of creating things like iParts or anything like that. It's all contained in the single part file. Now, model states, you could take advantage of these in several different file types. I've kind of alluded to the use in the part environment and in the assembly environment. So another area is sheet metal components. So in sheet metal components, maybe there's different situations where you want brackets with that have maybe 1 flange or 2 flanges or 3 flanges or have holes or don't have holes. And maybe there's even a process of manufacturing these. Maybe you want to bend it up in a certain order. So you could actually have all of those be captured in the model state. You could be bend flange 1 before flange 2. So let's go ahead and take a first look at the different part model states. Okay, so what I have here is an example. In this example, what we can do is have different model states in here. Okay, so you can see there's actually a model states folder. You'll get a default master model state out of the box with every single model that you generate, part or assembly. Okay, and then you could generate these different states. So you can see I had a cast version, a machined version, a drilled version, finished version. So several different versions in here, and these are pretty easy to create. So let me show you one where I'm gonna copy an existing one here. So generally the process is gonna be, is you're gonna build out your part to its completed state, okay? And then once you have that completed state, that would typically be like the master model state. And then you could create a copy of this, okay? You can see that by default, it's gonna be called master 1. You could rename this anything that you want it to be, okay? And once you have that model state, you of course would double click on it to make it active. And once that model state is active, you could go into the feature tree and add things, suppress things. In this case, I typically like to finish the part out first, then subtract things to it to create the different model states, but it really depends on the situation. In this case, I'll go ahead and right click and choose suppress features. And now you can see I'm going to have a model state that might more represent maybe the first machining step. Maybe it's a part that's just faced off. We've squared up those faces, and we're going to do that before maybe the next step, which would be to drill the holes out. Okay, so you can see the process is pretty straightforward. And then, of course, I could just double click these other model states to switch in between them. Okay, so that is probably the most common way to create new model states, but there are several different ways that you can create model states. So let's take a look at another example. All right, so I've got this this blade here. This it's got a bunch of different edges on it. Maybe some used in maybe a turbo or turbine of some sort. And what we want to do is create some model states in here so we can have different number of vanes on here. Okay, so you can see the part is basically in its completed state right now, and there's just a master model state available. Okay, so I want to do several things in here. Okay, I want to create a couple new model states, and maybe I even want to manage these a few different ways. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is adjust. Maybe I'll create a new model state first. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and just copy the one that's in here. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to go ahead and rename it this time. Now in this case, this is going to be a TI-ADSK-21. So this is going to be my 21 vane version of this, okay? And we can see right up here, I have some model annotation that's already added, and it's showing us that basically this is the 20 blade version of this, okay? Now, when you change up the number of blades, of course, that would typically be done with a parameter, but we also want to affect the iProperties. So I'm going to go ahead and make this one active. When I make it active, I then will have the iProperties available for this particular model state. And then I could go through and adjust the different options in here. So the part number is going to be different. The stock number, of course, is also going to be different. And then the description. All right, so that's adjusting this model state iProperties. Now, what we also have to do is adjust those parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the parameters dialog box. And you'll notice in here, there's basically a pattern, and it's set to 20 currently. And I'm just going to adjust that to 21. And if you watch down here, when I click off of that, you should see that update real time. Okay, so now we have a 21 blade version of the same blade, this impeller part. Now the thing is, maybe what we need here is even more versions of this. And certainly I could right click on the 21 blade version and copy another one down and do that repetitively multiple times, but that may not be the most efficient way to add a number of model states to this component, especially something where I'm just adjusting the pattern. Now, what we can do, if we right click on the model states folder, you'll see there's an option to edit via spreadsheet. When I launch this, it's basically just going to tell me none of the changes are going to take an effect until I close the spreadsheet, of course. And here we are. So what it's going to do is bring across all the different elements that I've had adjusted for the particular model states. So you can see basically it's the 4 property fields and then the 1 parameter that's available in the spreadsheet. In here, what I can do is simply just drag down these fields to the appropriate number. So maybe I want to add 3 more here. You can see it's automatically indexing the number as it does that. And that's good in this case. So there we are. And of course, we're going to have up to a 24 blade version. Now, in some cases, when you use Excel, depending on what the fields are, you don't get everything for free every single time. And some of these fields, you want to make sure that you enter in the correct value. So in this case, I'm going to key in the correct value for the blades for the description field. Okay, so just like that, I could create 3 additional ones. This is a much faster process editing this through the spreadsheet in Excel. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to close out. And it does take it just a moment for it to populate in the browser. And now what I could do is just click through here and you can see the change to the part, but also notice up here with the annotation that we can see the adjustments take place with all the different fields that we adjusted. So not only the parameter changes, but any of the I properties as well. Okay, so you can see the process. It's pretty simple to create these different model states in the parts themselves. Now, once you have these different model states in the models, of course, you're going to want to document that. So here I have a finished example of a document that you'd create of a model state. And the process is pretty simple. You'd go through, you'd place a base view of a component, and under the representations area, this is where you have the model states. And you could simply choose from the model state that you want to use. So you can see here, in this case, I'm editing the existing part that's already inserted, but certainly upon placement of the base view, you could also adjust the model state that you want to use. Once you have it set, certainly you could click OK, and it's going to drop it in. And also the ability to add tables. So you could use your general table for annotation in here, and it will actually retrieve the information for all the different model states and populate it to the table. So you don't have to do this manually. It's going to be live link to that data. So it's a pretty efficient way to create these basically family of parts without having to manage all those children. It's all in one place, really quick and easy to do. So let's switch gears a little bit here. So let's talk about assembly model states. So essentially you could do very similar things that you have in the part model state, but now you're applying it to assemblies. So things like if you have assembly variations, okay, maybe you have a different component that needs to be inserted at the end of the cylinder, okay, maybe you want to adjust the constraint offset value. Maybe you want to include or exclude different components. Maybe you even want to do weld preparations this way. Okay, so in the past, you always had to use the Weldment template type to do preparations, weldments, and then of course the welds. And here you could actually do maybe the preparations as a model state. Okay, that's a different option. So even those assembly features and things like that can be controlled through the different model states. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different assembly model states. Okay, so here we are. We have basically some type of tensioner of some sort, I think. And basically, there's two existing model states already. So we have our 0 unit, which basically removes a bunch of components. And then we have a unit with 2. Now, in this case, we're going to strictly update this through the use of a spreadsheet. So when I go into the edit spreadsheet, we're going to see we get the same different options here, the same options here. So I could drag down, the quantity of the units. One important thing about this though is the units already have to exist inside of the part model state. Okay, so we're looking at an assembly where a part with a model state was added to the assembly, and it's got up to 4 different units in each one of those. So that has to kind of be pre-existing here in this particular case. Okay, now also in here, you'll notice all the suppression and things like that. So all these different parts might have to be suppressed, maybe computed, maybe a constraint needs to be suppressed. So it really all depends on what's in your model. And in this case, it's basically we're going to compute everything for these additional 3 and 4 units, okay? And once I have that set, I'm going to go ahead and click Save here. And again, it'll take it just a moment to pop open inside of the browser. And now you can see now I have a 3 unit and a 4 unit. But really important to this process, in this particular case, if I dig down to this component, you'll notice inside of this component already, those model states already exist and they've been linked together. In a little bit, I'm going to give you another example on how to actually link these things together so your assembly model state can be linked to the part model state, and we're going to cover that under simplification, okay? But in this case, notice there is a little bit of a process here, but as long as you have the model states created in the parts, you can consume those at a higher level assembly, and then through the assembly model states, you can control part model states. Okay, so you can get a lot of control over this. So really, you could even replace the use of iAssemblies. So you don't have to deal with those children iAssemblies that you would have and those external components that sometimes could be very problematic to manage, especially if you're using a vault system and migrating over time and things like that can be a lot to manage. And these really can reduce the cost of managing the files because you're dealing with a whole lot less files to work with. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch back here. And the next thing that we're going to cover is the simplification. Okay, so again, simplification, really important thing for Inventor, especially if you want to reduce the file size, increase performance, or maybe you want to send these components out to a vendor or something like that, and you don't want to give away all your IP data with that data that you're sending out to the customers. Okay, so the part simplification also can be saved as basically a model state. Okay, and like I said, save your IP, or maybe if it's even for stress analysis, remove the fillets so those stress analysis commands can run a little bit smoother, take a whole lot less time. If there's no fillets in there, so there's a lot of benefits to using these. And then of course, simplified assemblies. Okay, same type of thing here. You want to simplify the assembly. You don't want to give away your IP. You want to do maybe even stress analysis on an assembly so you can remove some of that intelligence and things like that. And really what we can do here is link the simplified parts to assemblies and things like that. So I'm going to show you how to build that link and simplify some components here using model states and attaching them together. So let's go ahead and take a look at this example. So the first thing I want to show you here is kind of like the result, what we want in the end. So what we have here is looks like a gearbox. It's got some type of lever arm on it, and we might have different levels of detail in a way, using model states. All right, so we could have a fine, we can have a medium where we've removed some of the information, and then we could have a coarse one where basically a lot of the information is removed. So I'm going to show you the process of how to get to this final representation here where we want a very broad example, something that doesn't give away too much detail of our components or our parts. So basically where I'm going to start with this is with the gearbox itself. So in this case, I've got a gearbox, and this gearbox already has two model states. We have a fine model state. We've got a medium model state. But really what we're looking for in this case is just a coarse, a very, we want the envelope more or less. Does it fit in this space? And we don't really care about much else. So in this case, when I'm working in this part, what I'm going to do is start off by copying the medium model state, and we're going to get a new model state in here, and I'm going to give it a name. And in this case, I'm going to leverage some other functionality inside of Inventor. Okay, so what I want to do is actually use the simplification tool to define envelopes. And if you're not familiar with this, this is really how you can simplify components to make them look a lot different and basically save performance or make performance better, not give away the house if you're sending stuff out. And this tool gives us just a couple of options here. So we could create, boxes or cylinders. We could select different faces. And in this case, I want to make this thing more of a brick representation. So I'm going to select the bottom face. I'm going to go ahead and resize that. It allows me to grab these different arrows. I could set in offsets. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and align it to the surface on the very top. So I'm going to kind of remove all the detail from there. That looks pretty good. You have a simple representation. And then I'm going to expand that. So the cylinder over here also looks quite a bit different and simplified. So just like that. And now I have a very simplified representation of this gearbox. Okay. So I'll go ahead and save this simplified representation. And then I'm going to jump over to this assembly. Now in this case, this assembly only has two other model states in here. So we have our fine, we've got our medium, okay? But of course, what we want to do is copy that model state. And I'm going to rename this. So this is my coarse model state. And what I want to do is link these together. Okay, so this is an assembly model state. And you link these together through the use of the productivity tools. Okay, so about halfway down this list, you'll find link model states. And then it's going to ask you what to link together. So basically, if the assembly has a model state called coarse, and then if the part has a corresponding one that's also called coarse, I could select that. And what it's going to do is basically link those together. And now whenever I use the coarse, in this case, it's going to link all those coarse part model states to the assembly coarse model state. Okay, so I'm building a connection between those. So they're always going to update together and be exactly what I expect them to be. Now, when you do that, there is some things you have to watch out for, okay? Specifically constraints. If you think about it, if I've just dumbed down this model and I removed a bunch of holes and features and things that were maybe constraining other components into place, you'll notice here it doesn't kind of tell me that right in front. It doesn't notify me of that. And something that is a good benefit to do is maybe just click through these and make sure after you build this type of reference and link that it still works exactly the way that you want it to. Okay, so in this case here, you can see clearly there's some constraints that were applied, but those holes don't exist anymore, so that's really not a valid constraint anymore. So that needs to be addressed. Now, depending on what the issue is, it could be addressed several different ways. In this case, I'm just going to suppress out that constraint that is the issue. So removing it, clearly that constraint's not needed with that simplified representation anyways. And you may even find in some cases, depending on how the parts are used in here, you may have to add additional constraints or maybe offset constraints, maybe to lock something still into place. Like if I wanted this lever arm still to be in the right location, maybe I want to constrain it into place, or maybe I want to ground it into place so it doesn't inadvertently move out of position or something like that. So it really depends on what your end goal is, but just be cautious of the constraints and knowing that you may have to work with those if you remove some type of feature that is used at the assembly level. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic here. So this is the model state properties. So there are several times that you maybe want a property that's specific to a model state, but it's really not an out-of-the-box property. So maybe it's a custom property, okay? So what we could do is create unique instance properties, okay, for the different instances inside of an assembly, okay? And these are only available in the assembly, okay? It allows you to adjust it at the assembly level only. All right. Um, there is a small graphical notification when you do have these. You'll see the arrow that's pointing to that little dot that is this particular instance in the assembly. Whenever you see that little dot, it basically means that this individual component, this instance, has instance properties associated to it. Okay, and instant properties could be used for a variety of things. Some of the examples that I've seen or heard of is maybe this has a particular, stock number for this component, or maybe it's a serial number. Maybe all the motors are serialized and they have different serial numbers, and we really want to capture that, but really that serial number wouldn't be part of the actual part itself, right? It's really kind of as built, and we apply those serial numbers, and we want to make sure that maybe we apply things like these serial numbers to these components at the assembly level so we could identify them maybe through some ERP system through the serial number that's used. So we know exactly what motor it is in the assembly, okay? So that's how we could use instance properties. Now, these instant properties also can be seen at the drawing level, okay? You could see them in the bill of materials, in the parts list, in the balloons. Now, typically to get these to show, you are gonna have to make some modifications to things like the styles library. So if you wanna see a unique property, a serial number per se, okay? You want that to show up, you may have to go into the styles, the parts list, the parts list goes on the drawing, and in there you might have to add that custom property value. And the same thing with the balloons. You might have to create a custom style there. In our example, maybe a split balloon that's going to show not only the item number, but also that custom instance property in the balloon. So let's go over that. Okay, so what we have here is an assembly, and it has a lot of different components in it. There we go, it finally opened. So you can see pretty complicated assembly here, has lots of components, a lot of moving components in here. And what we really care about are the motors up here at the top. So each one of these motors needs a specific number associated with it. Now, in this case, this number really can mean, anything. Okay, maybe it's a serial number or stock number or location code or whatever it may be. Okay, so to start off with the instance properties, I want you to notice in the browser first. Okay, you can see none of those little dots appear in here yet. And also, these 4 motors are the first 4 items in my browser, okay? So when I select motor 1, and I use the right-click menu for this, all the way down here at the bottom, right above the normal iProperties, this is where you'll find the specific instance properties, okay? Keep in mind, instant properties only exist at the assembly, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and select that. And basically it's kind of like a custom iProperty dialog box that's shown here. And I'm gonna go ahead and create a new one. So we're just gonna call this unique ID, and I'll give it a pretty simple number here, and I'll add it. All right, so there we are. We have a unique instance property. I'll just go ahead and click OK. And you could probably barely see it here, but you'll notice that little dot, that graphical kind of notification that this has an instance property associated with it, okay? Now, I do want to do this for all the motors, okay? I want each one of these to have its, say, own serial number, okay? And I could right click on each one of these and say instance properties, go in there, add unique, but that's a lot of work. So there's actually an easier way that you can do this through the bill of material management, okay? So when I get into the bill of materials, and I'm gonna look under the structured bill of materials, because this is where it's evident that there is a unique ID here, okay? And I did add this custom property to my bill of material list, okay? So I did make sure to include that. But you'll notice that it says varies, right? And that's because one is different than all the rest at this point. And what I want to do here is just right click, and you'll see there's an option here, custom iProperty, or identify that as an instance property. Okay, so in this case, we know it's an instance property. It's not just a normal custom iProperty, but we have to tell the software what we're looking for. Okay, and once we do that, we do want to manage some of the merge settings that are available in the bill of materials. Okay, so we want to turn off merge instant rows because we know each one of these motors is going to have a different value. I'll select OK, and now we can see the actual value here that I entered. And down here at the bottom of the bill of materials, you'll notice that we have those 3 additional motors. And I'm just going to drag these up to the top. There we go. There we go. So now I have all the motors next to one another. And then from the BOM, what I can do is actually enter all these different values. So whatever the values might be for these, I would just go ahead and put those in. So it's a lot easier than maybe just right-clicking and digging down each time and recreating that property, because basically in here I could see it as one property field. I don't have to enter that same property information multiple times, and quick and easy access. Now, one thing I am going to do here is just make sure I renumber this bill of material quick so they end up at the top of the list. So there we go. So let's see what that looks like at the drawing level. Okay, so here we are. The first thing I want you to notice is over here in the parts list. Now, I had already placed the parts list onto here, and it was a custom style too, so it included the unique ID. So you're not going to get that for free. You will have to set up that style. But you'll notice in here, of course, that value is going to come across because it is linked to that instance property. Now, the other thing is, maybe I want to make sure that I balloon the different items in here with that unique ID. So when I go into place my balloons, I have also created a custom style that included the unique ID. And this is going to make it really simple. And I think the styles are really easy to create inside of Inventor. And essentially you just create those, add those to your global library, and you'll get them available in all your drawing files. So you only really have to do it once, okay? Even if you have thousands of legacy drawings, if you're using a global styles library, these styles can be easily shared to any drawing. So do keep that in mind. It's not that difficult to set up those things so you're using it properly. So I'm gonna go ahead and just drop these in. You'll notice they contain all the information that I would expect. And there we go. So you can see all that information comes right across from the bill of materials management that I did inside of the assembly itself, and also simply adding that instance property to the first motor and then sharing that data or information in the bill of material. Okay, so that's basically the high level overview of what model states are and how you guys can leverage them to improve basically how you manage your data. You could really get away from the use of iParts and iAssemblies and leverage model states to simplify things, make things easier to manage, easier to use. Everything's in a single document file. Now, with that being said, because this has been a change for 2022 and previous versions of the software worked a little bit differently, I thought it was also important to you to tell you what happened to all that legacy information maybe you've created or maybe you've used in the past, okay? So essentially model states replace levels of detail. So level of details don't exist in the software anymore. And people leverage these for a lot of reasons, main one being performance or maybe creating substitute components, okay? So the great thing is, the master LODs, the user-defined LODs that maybe you've created, all will come straight over and become model states. So there's nothing really you have to do. Just basically LOD is going to be removed from your browser in 2022. And now you'll look under model states and anything that you've done is still there. So you didn't lose anything that you did, okay? Now, with that being said, some of the ones that were out of the box don't exist anymore, okay? Or not existing like they did. So LODs for like all components suppressed or all parts suppressed, content center suppressed, those didn't come across as model states, okay? But you can look under the design view options, and things like all content center components suppressed is still there, but some of the others don't exist anymore, okay? But you do have that quick option to turn off, all content center suppressed under the design views, okay? So that's under design views now. That is not a model state, okay? So hopefully what I've shown you today will give you some advantages of using model states in your design practices. I really feel that these are a great tool and really simplify a number of different aspects, especially on the data management side of this. There's no children files to manage that you'd have with iParts or iAssemblies anymore, okay? So you get still all the advantages of creating the family tables, but now everything just lives in that single part file. And it's very easily, created and, maintained and shown through this new interface and through new utilizations of the tool with model states, okay? Now, I'm sure one question that will come up, and this is, I think I'm just gonna answer it before somebody asks it, is, what about all those old legacy iParts and iAssemblies and things like that? And really, if you have an iPart or iAssembly that you use for years and it's embedded into who knows hundreds of documents, it'd probably be really difficult to take that part and just convert it to something like a part that's just using model states, okay? Because you got to build, work with all those relationships. It's probably possible, but there's probably some work on your side that would have to be done. Now, another thing is, let's say you do have an iPart and you want to take the table. You want to just take that table. It's all in Excel, right? So you could literally just highlight that table, maybe save it to an external Excel file, get save copies of that part, delete out the iPart table, and edit with spreadsheet and paste it in. Okay. Now, a lot of things will go straight across when you do that. Things like the parameters, if the parameters are the same, they're named the same. If you change a size, there's probably not really a problem with that. I haven't tested this too much, but I suspect there won't be much of a problem with that. I think where people are going to run into trouble is like anything that has like a syntax. So if you think about it, inside of the iPart family table, you have things like suppress, compute, include, or exclude, especially include and exclude with like iAssemblies. It's not compute or suppress, right? Where in the part file or in the spreadsheet table, it is compute, suppress. So if it's an iAssembly, well, there's no include or exclude, right? It's either compute or express. So right there, that would be a problem because it wouldn't say include or exclude, it'd be compute or suppress. So there might be some trouble with those syntaxes, especially if you're trying to convert like an iAssembly over. I would just fully expect if you're suppressing things or including or excluding things, there's probably a lot to work to do with those. Um, with iParts, probably a little bit simpler because I think it is, suppress or compute, not include or exclude in those cases. So what I'd say is tread lightly, test that process out. I have a feeling it'll work for the most part, but you just have to watch out for some of those syntax things, especially if you use maybe bad habits like I did. I was really into using ones and zeros for compute and suppress. So, so compute was one, suppress was zero. I used to do that all the time, so I didn't have to write out the whole word. So just definitely watch out for those things. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to any questions. Now there is a question panel, so you can go ahead and ask some questions in there. Let's see here. So it looks like we have a question from Howard. Let me see if I can make this so I can read it. Where do you find the envelope feature and simplify the model? Okay, so those are under the simplification panel. So I'll just bounce back over here. Let me open up a part file. So this part file right here. Okay, so that envelope is under the simplification panel. Now this panel is generally turned off by default. So if you want to turn on the simplification panel, you actually have to right click on a tab here, show panels. You'll see all the different panels available. There is the simplification one. So just make sure you check that box and then you'll have those tools right on your ribbon interface so you can quickly access the simplification tools. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? If you want, you could also raise your hand. It looks like some people have questions, maybe not entered into the queue. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, Jeff, looks like he's got a question. So I think I can trying to unmute your line, but it's not unmuting. Okay, I'm gonna unmute everybody. See if they're, Jeff, are you there? Okay, I'm not sure why it's not letting me unmute any lines. Oh, wait, I just heard somebody. Is that you, Jeff? Hmm. All right, Jeff, see if you can unmute your own line. I think you should have control to do that now. All right, so I'm not sure. All right, so I don't hear Jeff. How about Michael Erie? See if you could unmute your line and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, so my question was, are you able to reorder the model states in the browser? So let's say you were modeling manufacturing states and for some reason you missed one.
Yep.
It looks like you can.
Yeah, you certainly can. So right up
Awesome.
here, you could just drag and drop those things around pretty easily. Yep. So certainly if you want them in that exact order, makes it a little easier to place your base view in the drawing. Certainly reorder those. Yep.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
All right. Good question. Okay. What about Michael Rack? You could unmute your line. Michael? Michael Rack?
How about
Yes.
now? There we go.
Yep, I hear you. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, it was just more of a comment there. Just I appreciate the info. This is the kind of thing that I didn't know a lot about it, and I've kind of seen it and played with it a little bit. But this was informative for me and gave me some ideas of where I can use it.
Oh, that's great to
I
hear.
just had the one comment that I had was, when we are trying to do, you talked about trying to go from level of detail to, the new system. There might be like a find replace tool in Excel that I think maybe could be used to, kind of change everything at once.
Yeah, that's a great point. And certainly I've used that find and replace tool lots and lots of times in the past. And certainly, yeah, you could go in there and say, well, I want to replace include with compute. And certainly you could probably do that in just a few minutes and have exactly what you need. Great comment. Okay. Okay, what about Ryan? Ryan, you can unmute your line.
Tim, very quick question for you. So with iParts, typically you would have a table with all the different files that you create, and you would have to right click and generate each one. How does that work with model state? Do you need to still generate each one?
No, you don't, not at all. Yeah, so basically everything's just managed in that one file and there's no external files to generate anymore. So yeah, you basically just create it in your single part file. And once that's done, basically consider it like the factory only. And then all the children are just all in that same document. And you could just toggle between the different model states in that file without having to deal with any children outside of it. Yep, so there's no generate files anymore. That doesn't exist. Everything just exists in one file.
Great, thank you.
Yep, it really makes managing it a lot easier. You don't have to worry, you don't have to deal with any of those files anymore, or them being out of date, or what happens when I change the factory, what happens to the children, all those type of questions. You don't, not even questions anymore with model states.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yep, yep, great question. All right, I'm looking back at the question queue. Okay, will IParts still be supported in future releases of Inventor? So that's a great question from Jeff. And from what I've heard, iParts aren't going anywhere at this point. It was actually, I don't know if anybody else here attended any of the AU sessions this week, and I made sure to get on the model states one to just see if they had any more information about this. But the general consensus was that it doesn't seem like they're going anywhere. But clearly, I had to put a caveat on that. Clearly, I don't work for Autodesk, and I don't have any control over the direction of the product. But the feeling I was getting, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere at this point. And I don't think they could go anywhere until they would find a solution where's the push button to convert everything to a model state. Plus, how would you deal with all the legacy stuff? It seems like it would be really hard to get rid of. And I wasn't getting the impression that they were getting rid of iParts or iAssemblies at this point. So I think they're safe for the time being, as far as I can tell. Okay, so this question was a little off the topic from Ethan. Autodesk working on having a balloon style that auto sizes to fit the text. I thought it did auto size based upon like how many numbers in there. I thought it would grow larger. So that's a good question. I would say if you're having trouble with the balloon sizes not fitting the text, I imagine you're one of our customers and get support. You could just email into support@m2t.com and send that question in there, and we'll have somebody take a look at your issue and see if there's something going on. But generally, I think they do resize. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions at this point. If you do think of any other questions, you could certainly, I'll just go ahead and give you my email address. If you, maybe I'll throw it into the chat quick. I'll just throw it in there. All right, so my email address is now in the chat. So if you do come up with any other questions, I'll certainly be willing to talk with you, or reply back some emails if you have any general questions. Do know if you are one of our customers, you do get support included with your contract. So as long as you're under contract with us, you could email support@m2t.com. So with that being said, I believe I have answered all the questions. And I'd just like to thank everybody for showing up today. This is a great topic, some great new features in the software, and I highly encourage that you guys take use of those. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.